Hello and welcome everyone to the daily news analysis of 13th of September 2023। तो आज की इम्पोर्टेंट आर्टिकल्स हम लोग पहले डिस्कशन कर लेते हैं। पहला जो आर्टिकल है, रिटेल इन्फ्लेशन इज एज फूड प्राइसेस स्टिल बाइट, देन 2300 dead, many missing as flash floods hit Libya city, drop the bad idea of simultaneous election, spotlighting another broader point, the rogue channel, the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita needs a relook, analyzing where India stands in the G20, climate phenomena and food security, how fraternity in India is different from the idea enshrined in the constitution. G20 saved G7 saved G20 by agreeing to declaration, German envoy. Then South Korea on joining Quad, says envoy Chang Jae-bok. Rajnath lays foundation stone for Neoma airfield near LAC in the eastern Ladakh. Then July industrial output rises by 5.7%, a month high gain. Then North Korea scheme arrives in Russia to meet with Putin. A canvas of racism, sexism when AI reimagined global health. ये साइंस वाला पर्सन है। तो चलिए एक वन बाय वन देख लेते हैं। Retail inflation eases food prices still bite. India's retail inflation eased slightly to 6.83% in August from the 15-month high of 7.44% in July, but the rise in food prices remained elevated at around 10%, and rural consumer continued to face over 7% inflation. The year-on-year rise in vegetable prices, which had soared 37.4% in July, eased a little but was still high at 26.1% last month. Inflation in cereals moderated marginally from around 13% in July to 11.85% in August, but pulses prices rose 13% again amid concerns about a lower Kharif sowing stocking them further in coming months. While a 5.8% sequential drop in vegetable prices from the July contributed almost half the decline in August's consumer price index CPI, a slight dip in the inflation rate for clothing, footwear, housing and miscellaneous items helped too. However, with 7 of the 12 food segments in index seeing accelerated inflation, the outlook for food inflation remain on edge, cautioned Aditi Nair, chief economist at ICRA. Economists believe that the Reserve Bank of India may ignore the transient 2 month streak of inflation breaching its super tolerance threshold of 6%, but persistently high food prices could impact other components of the consumption basket. Food inflation will remain a key monitorable for them because, if sustained, it can spill over to other components and steer to headline CPI inflation above the RBI's target, and this can constrain monetary policy as central banks do respond to inflation when it starts become generalized, noted CRISIL's chief economist Dharmakirti Joshi. The pace of price rise for milk remained high at around 7.7% in August, while the inflation in spices accelerated to 23.2% from 21.6% in July. Eggs became 4.3% pricier in August compared to 3.8% in July, while meat and fish inflation touched 3.7% from 2.2% in the previous month. Fruits inflation also gathered pace to 4.05%, while the deflation in the edible oils and fats The only items in the food basket to record a drop in prices in August eased slightly from -16.8% to -15.3%. As many as 12 states recorded higher inflation than the national average of 6.83%, with Rajasthan seeing the steepest price rise of 8.6%. Delhi, on the other hand, clocked the lowest inflation of the 3% in August, possibly aided by the subsidized supply of tomatoes to people, reckoned Madan Sabnabis, Bank of Baroda's chief economist. The recent measures to lower LPG cylinder prices will have a 0.2% to 0.25% impact on inflation in September, but this will not be very comforting yet for monetary policy makers, he said. Then next is 2,300 dead, many missing as flash flood hit Libya city. At least 2,300 people were killed and thousands were reported missing in Libya after catastrophic flash flood broke river dam and tore through an eastern coastal city. Massive destruction shattered at the city of Derna, home to about 1 lakh people, where multi-story buildings on the river banks collapsed and houses and cars vanished in the raging water. Libyan emergency services reported an initial death toll of more than 2,300 in Derna alone and said over 5,000 people remained missing while about 7,000 were injured. The floods were caused by torrential rains from the storm Daniel, which made landfall in Libya on Sunday. Darna, 25 to 50 kilometers east of Benghazi, is ringing by hills, ringed by hills and bisected by what is normally a dry riverbed in summer, but which has turned into a raging torrent of mud-brown water that also swept away several major bridges. The toll is huge and might reach thousands, said Tamer Ramadan of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, three of whose volunteers were also reported dead. We confirm from our independent sources of information that the number of missing people is hitting 10,000 persons so far, Mr. Ramadan told reporters via video link from neighboring Tunisia. Then आज का जो editorial portion है, drop the bad idea of simultaneous election. In the recent weeks, there has been increasing discussion about the possibilities of having national and state elections at the same time, popularly known as one election, one nation, one election. The formation of a committee helmed by the former President of India, Ramnath Kovind, to determine how this might be implemented and what manner of constitutional changes might be required to make it a legal reality have generated further debate. The primary arguments in the favor of simultaneous election are twofold. First, that it will decrease the cost of conducting elections and of electioneering, and second, that it will free up political parties from being in permanent campaign mode and allow them to focus on governance and for that matter constructive opposition for a 5-year period. Point and counterpoint. Against this, critics have pointed out that when you crunch the numbers, the actual financial savings are relatively minuscule. Furthermore, it is a repetitively recent pathology of Indian political system that central government minister and politicians spend a significant amount of time campaigning in state election. If the concern therefore is that frequent state elections hamper governance and the business of parliament, then simultaneous elections seem a needlessly complicated answer when a simple one is available. That state elections should be primarily fought by state party units while national politician can get on with the task of governance. The reality, however, is that the increasingly centralized and presidential character of election of Indian election campaigns mean that this is unlikely to be a reality in the near future. Critics of simultaneous election have raised a few other objections. First, the logistical nightmare of conducting simultaneous election in a country of little over 1.4 billion people in a context where even state elections need to take place in multiple phases. The second and graver concern is the incompatibility of a rigid election timetable with some of the fundamentals of the parliamentary democracy is, as is well known, at the time of independence, central and state elections were conducted simultaneously. This arrangement broke down towards the end of 1960s because of the use of Article 356 of the Constitution, which authorizes the Union to suspend or even dismiss state governments in a narrowly defined range of circumstances, but also and apart from that, the essence of a parliamentary democracy is that at all times the government must enjoy the confidence of House following which it must step down and go back to the people for a fresh mandate. Consequently, it is obvious that even if legally and practically one is able to synchronize central and state elections for one cycle, this will break down the moment a government falls to this. Two solutions have been proposed, both of which tend to make the problem worse. The first is that of president's rule, that is, central rule will be imposed in the state until the 5-year period is over. Needless to say, this will starkly undermine both federalism and democracy. The second is that elections will be held in that state, but the term of the new assembly will only be until the next cycle, which could be in a year or 3 years or 4 years. Not only does this undercut both the justifications for simultaneous elections, cost and an avoidance of continuous campaign, but rather leads to perverse incentives. For example, how much governance will a state government be able to do if elections are scheduled in a year? Possibility of a more horse trading. The upshot of this is that there will be a strong push towards avoiding the fall of a government, even when it has lost the confidence of the House in the ordinary course of things. And as we have seen in India, there is almost institutionalized remedy for this defection or horse trading. It is by now clear that the 10th schedule's prohibition on horse trading has been rendered more or less dead letter, as politicians have found various ways to get around this, and courts have not been successful in stopping it. Thus, as was pointed out by lawyer and parliamentarian Kapil Sibal in an interview recently, simultaneous elections are likely to see an explosion of horse trading, where the political parties with the biggest pockets will be the biggest beneficiaries, while these intractable issues speak to the implementation of simultaneous election at a deeper level. There are two principled and interrelated arguments against the idea of federalism and democracy. First, let us take federalism. Over the years, it has increasingly come to be accepted that Indian federalism is not simple a matter of administrative convenience, but also a matter of principle that recognizes the legitimacy of linguistic, cultural, ethnic, and other forms of collective aspirations through the grant of statehood. In this context, there is, of course, Indian democracy at the central level, but also at the level of each state. Democracy takes its own set of claims, demands, and aspirations. Simultaneous elections risk and blurring of these distinct forums and arenas of democracy, with the risk that state level issues will be subsumed into national. This is inevitable given the cognitive dominance of the national as well as the fact that national level parties frequently campaign in a national register for understandable reasons. Keeping absolute power in check, a related point is that in our constitutional scheme, the federal structure is an important check upon the concentration of power buttressed by the experience of the Rajya Sabha at the central level. The federal structure in turn is sustained by a plurality of democratic context and a plurality of political outfit at the state level. Simultaneous elections for the regions pointed out above risk undermining that plurality and risk precisely the kind of concentration of power that federalism is meant to be a bulwark against a second on democracy ring despite the ringing wars with which the preamble of the constitution begins. The people have very little space in the constitution, especially when it comes to exercising control over their representatives, unlike many other constitutions where public participation in lawmaking is a guaranteed right along with the other rights such as the right to recall. In the Indian constitutional scheme, elections are the only form of public participation in the public sphere. There is a different conservation to be held about why this is not enough, but given this framework, relatively regular and frequent elections allow for more extended public participation and debate. Simultaneous elections would shrink this scope substantially without any countervailing changes to deepen it in the other domains. Therefore, it is clear that the administrative benefits from the simultaneous elections are overstated but at the best and non-existent at the worst. However, the cost both in the implementation and in the concept itself are significant and create a non-trivial risk when it comes to protecting and preserving the federal and democratic design of the constitution. These therefore are good reasons why the idea is a bad one and ought not to be acted upon. Then next is spotlighting another border point, the rogue channel. In early August this year, the Union Minister Amit Shah visited Harami Nala and the border observation post BOS of the Border Security Force is the sector in the Sarkrik area of Kutch, Gujarat along the India-Pakistan international border. The aptly named Harami Nala, a rogue or treacherous channel in English, is one of the most inhospitable place among the border. It has also been at the center of a cross-border mischief and exploration by infiltrators. Many media clips showed the Home Minister visiting BOP 1170 to take stock of the situation, and he rightly averred that it is now impenetrable as a result of round-the-clock border vigilance, better surveillance. According to a BSF release, the Home Minister laid the foundation stone for a mooring place at Koteshwar in Kutch and also inaugurated the newly constructed Chidiamud, Bearbet, Link Road and Uppi Tower in the Harami Nala area. Mr. Shah tweeted that he had inaugurated a 9.5-meter tall observation post tower equipped with high-resolution pan-tilt zoom cameras to bolster intelligence gathering capabilities. This will come up at BOP 1164 further off north from BOP 1170 along the vertical line of the international boundary. The great advantage of the new tower worth 3 crore rupees and others coming up at BOPs 1165, 1166 and 1169 apart from three more in the circle and in the creek area is that they will provide a live camera feed and continuous surveillance over the open stretch of water and mud flat surrounding Harami Nala. These initiatives together worth 361.35 crore rupees are being rolled out in the pursuit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of a secure border. The mooring place project with an allocated budget of 257 crore rupees will make a huge difference by allowing berthing, repairs and maintenance for bigger vessels including the floating BOPs, thus bolstering the BSF's capabilities in the creek area. Araminala is a natural water body approximately 25 kilometers long that flows west to east from Pakistan into Perth just south of the Digha port sector, flanked by the vast marshy and mud floods that are affected by the low and high tides. About 22 odd kilometers of the channel lie on the Indian side of the vertical line of the IB between India and Pakistan, which itself is not contested. Distinctive characteristics: the water body has some unique characteristics. The tidal waters surge from the Pakistani side, and over the years, the channel is extending further on the Indian side. On the Pakistani side lies the Chini Bandh, China Band, just north of Bandhoduru, built with Chinese assistance to prevent the tidal water from the inundating areas on their side. On the Indian side, there is a desolate emptiness over the entire spread of Haraminala, except in the rear areas at considerable distance from the IB, where the factories that have come up to produce salt, bromide, and other chemical carried by mineral-rich water. The Haraminala is extremely rich in fishing, especially prawns. Moreover, the formidable marshy terrain through which it runs makes it possible to approach or patrol on foot even during low tide. Treacherous tide, morass, and mirage are matched by scorching temperature about 50 degrees Celsius in summer. In contrast, the Haramnala has always been more accessible from the other side. Pakistani fishing boats try and make their way up the many small creeks to surreptitiously enter the Haraminala on the Indian side, drawn by the plentiful catch. In the past, did in the past they did so with impunity. There was the added risk of infiltration by terrorists and drugs and arms smuggling. In the past, the entry point of the Haraminala on the Indian side could not be approached by the BSF personnel due to a lack of infrastructure. They had to wade through deep sloughs to launch small patrol boats into the channel from areas to the rear. The situation improved after a set of all-terrain vehicles were procured from Italy and stationed at board pillar 1175, the last such observation post at the time. It also helped that special scaffolding was put up on the bank of the channel in the rear areas on the Indian side where troops could bivouac for watch duties and be rotated in the ATV's speed boats centered alongside also began to make a difference in turn from preventing ingress by Pakistani fishing boats. Such measures were not foolproof until an embankment was constructed along with a road to enable access to the very mouth of Haraminala where it enters India. After 2014, the Narendra Modi government gave particular emphasis to border and coastal security. In the past 9 years, the Ministry of Home Affairs has ramped up the creation of composite BOPs and all along the borders, including the creeks and Araminella area is a modern composite BOP 1175 was constructed in 2016 and BOP 1117 the 2022 the construction of embankment and road infrastructure along the vertical line of IB have enabled the new observation post to come up between border pillars 1164 and 1153 in a manner that infiltration can be nipped in the board at the entry point along the IB. This is the first ever visit by any Home Minister, the BSF personnel in the sector, including the commandos called the Creek Crocodiles and the Forces Water Wing have benefited from focused guidance and leadership at the highest political level. When he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi visited several BSF posts, recalls J.S. Bhalla, former DIG of the BSF, no one of his visits of the one of his visits to the run of course Mr. Modi was apprised about the drinking water problem at the BOPs in the Bigha port and the surrounding areas. He ensured that piped Narmada River water was supplied to BOPs. Then Bharatiya Nyaya Sanghita needs a relook. It is important that the offences in any personal penal law and clearly defined. Those who administer the law must know what offence has been committed so that arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement does not occur. In Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2015, the Supreme Court held Section 66A of the Information Technology Act as unconstitutionality, found the term glossy offensive in the section to be vague and devoid of precision. Recently, the central government introduced a few new offences in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita bill to deal sternly with terrorism-related crimes and organized crimes. It is feared that some terms in the bill may be challenged as they are vague. Additions and omissions. The number of sections in the Samhita has been reduced mainly because various sections pertaining to definition have been merged into one section. Offences and punishment have been clubbed together, and offences of a similar nature brought under one section. A few omitted sections are unnatural offences. Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, adultery. Section 497 of the IPC, and attempt to commit suicide. Section 309 of the IPC, though not completely. While the definition of terrorist act in the Samhita has been largely borrowed from the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of UPA of 1967, the word to strike terror in the people have been replaced with the words to intimidate the general public, though less severe. These words do not change the gravamen of the section. The expressions such as to destroy the political, economic, and social structure of the country is vague. The explanation needed to the section defining a terrorist is at variance with the one who commits a terrorist act. Similarly, while terrorist organizations are notified in the first schedule to UAPA, terrorist organization is given a specific definition in the section. The only advantage of aiding terrorism in the Samhita is that the investigating officer would not require any section for a prosecution from the government, but at the same time the respective bail. Sorry. Another offense is reintroduced with some changes in place of sedition is about acts and endangered sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. This appears more objective as does not intend to punish criticism of disaffection towards the government. The addition of words such as purposely or knowingly severe serve as a safeguard because they indicate mandatory presence of the mens rea But it would help if the meaning of subversive activities is clarified to dispel fears of misinterpretation and misuse by the authorities. Further, the explanation added to the section appears incomplete and needs to be modified. Similarly, taking a cue from the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act (MCOCA) 1999, a new offence called organized offence has been added with the difference that the three instead of two or more persons indulging in such activities would constitute an organized crime syndicate. While a dozen categories of offences have been specifically included in the definition. Offences such as cybercrimes having severe consequences appear vague. The new offence of the PT organized crimes, which starts with the vague expression any crime that causes general feeling of insecurity among citizens relating to theft, does not carry any barometer to assess the general feelings of insecurity. The constituents of organized crime or gang are not specified further. While most offences related to theft and are cognizable offences, PT organized crime has been categorized as a non-cognizable offence. Most surprisingly, while snatching, a type of theft that has been defined as a separate offence with the same punishment as that of theft, though without any provision for subsequent conviction. It has been categorized as non-cognizable offence. The gravity of a murder based on factors such as race, community, sex, or language by a group of five or more has been diluted. Punishment varies from 7 years of imprisonment for life, whereas the present provision provides for the life imprisonment of death for the every person acting with common intention. This clause may not stand scrutiny of the Constitutional Court, as the differentiation is prima facie arbitrary and unreasonable. At the same time, punishment for fatal accident could extend to 10 years of 10 years if the accused does not report the incident to the police or escapes from the scenes. Sexual intercourse by employing deceitful means has been rightly made a separate offence with lesser punishment as provided for rape, but exceptions with regard to marital rape, the constitutionality of which is under challenge, but before the Supreme Court has not been removed. The right to decent cremation or burial, which is a part of right to life and was allegedly denied to many during the pandemic, has not been taken cognizable by making it a new offence, though it was noticed by many courts. While the addition of community service as a form of punishment for petty offences is laudable, at a reformation approach to punishment finds no place in the statement of objects and reasons seems regressive. More, deliberations as the Sangita will have a far-reaching impact on the criminal justice system. It needs further deliberations. The Parliamentary Standing Committee must ensure that inconsistency are checked, vague expressions are removed, appropriate explanation added, and drafting errors eliminated. Then next we have analyzing where India stands in the G20. On September 9 10, India hosted the 18th G20 summit in New Delhi, focusing on the theme One Earth, One Family, One Future. Food security, climate change, energy development, healthcare, and digitalization were deliberated upon at the global forum formed to discuss economic and financial matters. The summit wrapped up successfully as India transferred the G20 presidency to Brazil. This analysis evaluates India's performance in the recent decades across various socio-economic metrics in comparison to its fellow G20 members. The G20 is made up of India, Australia, China, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, Turkey, and United Kingdom and European Union. Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, the United States, South Africa, and South Arabia. Chart 1 compares the GDP per capita in dollar of 19 regions, 18 countries plus the European Union both between 1970s and 2022. GDP per capita per dollar is the sum of the gross value added by all the resident producers in the economy divided by mid-year populations in 1970 with a GDP per capita of $111.97. India ranked 18 out of the 19 regions analyzed, while Indonesia lagged behind India in 1978. It moved ahead by 2022, pushing India to the last spot with the GDP per capita of $2,388.62. Chart 2 compares the Human Development Index of 19 countries between 1990 and 2021. The HDI is a measure of life expectancy, access to education, and standard of living. HDI in the graph is measured on a scale of 0 worst and 1 best. India HDI improved from 0.43 in 1990 to 0.63 in 2021. However, despite its progress in absolute terms, India ranked at the bottom of the list. India performance has seen little relative improvement in metrics relating to health, even though there has been growth in absolute numbers. In 1990, the average life expectancy in India was 45.22 years, which was better than China's 33.27 years. By 2021, life expectancy rose to 67.24 years, ahead of South Africa. However, India's ranking remained the same as China surpasses India in 1990 with an infant mortality rate of 88.8, and India ranked at the bottom of the 20 regions analyzed in 2021. The infant mortality rate improved to 25.5 and India ranked 19, just ahead of South Africa. Chart 3 compares the labor force participation rate LFPR above 15 years of age in 20 regions between 1990 and 2021-22. In 1990, with the LFPR of 54.2%, India ranked 18 above Italy 49.7% and Saudi Arabia 53.3% in 2021-22. Its rank slipped to 19, only ahead of Italy's 49.4%. Notably, India's LFPR also decreased to 49.5%. In this speed, Chapter 4 compares the share of women in parliament of 19 regions, 18 countries plus the European Union between 1980 to 2022. Despite having seen several women in leadership positions, India's relative growth in the share of women in parliament has been slow, with many countries and the European Union outpacking India. From 8.1% in 1998, the share almost doubled to 14.9% in 2022. But when compared to the 18 countries and the European Union, India's rank slipped from 15 in the 1998 to 18 in the 2022, just ahead of Japan 9.9%. India has succeeded in curbing carbon emission over the past 3 decades. It has been the lower emitter of CO2 in 1990 to 90 and in 2020 among the 20 regions analyzed. However, its progress in adopting eco-friendly energy sources to combat climate change has been relatively slow. Most G20 nations, including the US and Mexico, generated less than 2% of their electricity from renewables in 1990s. By 2015, only 5.36% of the India's electricity came from renewable sources. India ranked 13 out of 20 regions analyzed. Then next climate phenomena and food security. There has been a series of destructive weather and climate phenomena in India this year, demonstrating the complexity of our precipitation system. There was the western or disturbance, which usually brings much needed moisture from European seas to western Himalayas and parts of northern India in the winter and spring. But this year, the western disturbances lived up to its name and remained active late into summer, snapping at the heels of a southwest monsoon. The widespread destruction of infrastructure and loss of life due to landslide and flooding in the western Himalayas and northern India raised concerns about the sustainability and resilience of our development project in the mountains and floodplains between July 5 to July 20. The affected areas was estimated to be between 2,124 and 7,362 square kilometers. The population affected was potentially more than 25 lakh. El Nino phase climate-linked warmth is likely to weaken winter precipitation from the western disturbances and shift it to more intensive rain event. If this happens later into summer, its consequences will be of a great concern. Moreover, then came evidence that an El Nino phase of the quasi-periodic El Nino southern oscillations, a phenomena is the eastern and central tropical Pacific Ocean was intensifying and likely to affect the southwest monsoon. Not all El Nino events have adverse effect on the southwest monsoon because the latter is driven by many ocean atmosphere land processes, but the relationship between the two entities have been changing over time when an El Nino affect the southwest monsoon. Another ocean atmospheric phenomena in the Indian Ocean called the positive phase Indian Ocean dipole (IOD) could balance the consequences. Dynamic regression models have suggested that 65% of the inter-annual variability of southwest monsoon over many decades can be attributed to the combined effects of ENSO and IOD. El Nino and food security. Agriculture depends on two types of water: green water, which is rain-fed soil moisture trapped by food and cash crops, eventually transpiring into the atmosphere; and blue water, which is the water in the rivers, lakes, reservoir, and groundwater. The latter is the basis for irrigation in agriculture. Apart from drinking and industry use, supply and maintains ecological flows in rivers. The El Nino and other climatic phenomena affect rain-fed agriculture in many ways, from delaying the start of rains and affecting swing to hot temperature that may negatively influence the plant growth and soil moisture. Despite investment in dams, reservoir irrigation systems, could around half of the cultivated areas in India depends on green water and not blue water. Our daily diet in India, from cooking oil to diverse food, also requires 3,268 liters of water per person per day on average, subject to regional viability. Some 75% of this footprint is green water, demonstrating the importance of rain-fed agriculture to our food and nutritional security. Even in irrigated areas, many dominant crops require green water for different extents. For example, in Kharif season, rice paddy under irrigation uses green water to the tune of 35%. Many staples crops like tur dal, soybean, groundnut, and maize also rely considerably on green water at this time. In 2015-16 El Nino year, soybean production in India declined by 28% from the 2022 average age, we have just emerged from one of the warmest and driest August in many decades. One can hope that the IOD or other phenomena will help reduce the impact of the El Nino on India's agriculture, farmer food security, food inflation, and conflicts over the water sharing between states. El Nino and the northeast monsoons at the end of southwest monsoon, the low water stock in our reservoir and groundwater partially determine the fate of Rabi crop sown in winter and the overall water security contributions of green water from the northeast monsoon in the southeast India and the water western disturbances in the north will play significant role as well. The Rabi crops of the 2024 are going to bank heavily on blue water or irrigation during the summer months. Additionally, studies have found that 43% of heavy rainfall events in the northeast monsoon, including the 2015 Chennai floods that caused the widespread devastation coincide with El Nino, considered central India's highlands encompassing 36 districts in the state of Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, which are emerging a climate change hotspots critical for our water, food, and ecological security. It includes 17 urban centers with a population over a lakh and the headwater for five of India's 10 major river basins. The basin precipitation ranges from 699 mm in the west to 1380 mm in east, with an average of 987 mm per annum. The region experiences significant and perennial water stress driven largely by Rabi irrigation with blue water. As a result, some 7 to 70-80% of landscape experiences water stress for 4 or more months in a year. Of the 17 urban centers, 11 face water stress for 6 to 8 months, with Nagpur enduring water stress for longest duration. Persistence uncertainties. The amount of monsoon precipitation has been declined since 1950s, attributed by some climate scientists to reduction in land sea thermal gradient due to warming of seas. However, indication of increased frequency of intense rain events and greater heat and moisture stress for people and ecosystem align with the prediction of warming impact of the on the atmosphere water holding capacity and accelerations of the hydrological cycle. These events increasingly interact with a hydrologically incompatible land use of and infrastructure, resulting in high exposure and vulnerability to disaster. Global climate model and their regional equivalent have failed to simulate these observed trends in precipitation, increasing the uncertainty in future projections. However, climate models are trying to to improve these models. Given the persistent uncertainties, we should base our adaptation plans on the idea that current trends will continue: more frequent intense rains, summer heat and moisture stress, and declining of monsoon precipitation in some part of the country. It is possible that the warming countries total rainfall in parts of India may increase, but the share of extreme rain events may go up when this tipping point will transpire is uncertain. Attributing specific extreme rain events to climate change or natural dynamics in our complex climate system or both is challenging for climate scientists, but mounting evidence suggests that a warming atmosphere is amplifying many natural dynamics with our complex climate system. How we respond in terms of agriculture and food security, there is now emphasis on reducing dependence on water intensive crops, with millets being the crop of choice. Shifting to less water intensive crop may reduce vulnerability of our food system to phenomena like El Nino. One estimate suggests that more than 30% of blue water can be saved with such shifts in crops, with some gains in protein and micronutrient, but a slight reduction in calories. But however, water shaped in this manner may not necessarily help recharge our depleted aquifers or restore ecological flows in our rivers. Now, new demands for saved water quickly emerge unless appropriate policies are in place. There are several adaptation and alternative crop strategy available now thanks to the work of our farmers and agriculture scientists. They include shifting to millets and alternative varieties of dominant cereal and advisory to farmers to switch to crop with a shorter growing cycle. The government both at the center and in the states along with the farmers benefit from forecasts of phenomena like El Nino and their impact on the moon and improvements in short term weather forecast and early warning system of both intensive rain dry dry spell. Based on the decades of experience, it is clear that alternative short-term and long-term management of our dams and reservoir is required to reduce risk of dam-based flood-based disaster and ecological damage to aquatic ecosystem. How we respond as a society and in terms of governance to the water and climate change crisis, which link food water and ecological security through diversifying our agro-food system, a lower dependence on blue water, rejuvenating our rivers and sustainable water sharing between humans and nature will to a great extent determine the well-being of 1.4 billion people. Jagdish Krishnaswamy is Dean School Environment and Sustainability, Indian Institute of Human Settlements, Bengaluru. नेक्स्ट आर्टिकल जो है हाउ फ्रैटर्निटी इन इंडिया different from the idea enshrined in the constitution. The idea of fraternity as philosopher Angel Coyle argues in 2019 book in his 2019 political fraternity democracy beyond freedom and democracy should be mainly understood in the domain of the political. There is to say that the concept involves the emancipations and empowerment of the people despite its variegated history since the times of Plato and though neglected, it remains a significant tenet of liberal political philosophy along with the idea of liberty and equality. India's independence struggle and the subsequent emergence of constitutional democracy saw the necessity of liberty, equality, fraternity for a complex Indian society at the precipice of becoming an independent republic in the context, Ambedkar's stress on the inseparability of the three ideas of three ideas and underlying of fraternity cannot be emphasized enough. The farmers of the Indian Constitution knew the significance of fraternity in a society divided on the basis of various hierarchical society inequalities. Ironically, though fraternity also happens to be the constitutional value that has received the maximum neglect both in world of ideas and in the political field of action. However, the nation of fraternity has its own journey within India sociology, regardless of its huge political purchase. Otherwise, while fraternity remains one of the chief goals of India's parliamentary democracy and is actually the foundational political objective of the constitutional democracy. The current nature of the India's fraternity is different from the political fraternity espoused in its constitution. Origins of the concept, the idea of a fraternity has been an elusive concept since ancient times in Plato's Lysis, the philosopher, invokes the word of philia, love for strong desires to pursue wisdom, that is, love and friendship with the other becomes more meaningful through the sharing of knowledge. The emphasis is on share, which gives us an early idea in the discourse of fraternity in ancient Greece. In Aristotle, we see the emergence of a polis, the logical location of man who remains first and foremost a political being and hence is a part of a police and not of the wild justice and friendship among citizens came to be the most enduring features of the police. This here is the birth of the idea of political fraternity in the Middle Ages. Fraternity flourished mostly through religious within the churning of a Christian society in Europe. The concept of fraternity then eventually found in entry into politics with the French Revolution of 1789 in the triptych of liberate, egalite, fraternite from the civic politico friendship of ancient Greece to medieval Christian society and then to its revolutionary dimension, fraternity has always found a place in the ever-evolving world of actions, friendship among equals in community ties. As MC Williams, in the idea of fraternity in America 1973, explained once his an integral value system which is foundation of the idea of fraternity, and it is not surprising that in the western world that is how the idea of fraternity grew. The privileging of the idea of community and the moral values associated with it over the individual gradually gave way to religious morality and its associated way of life. This elementary dimension of the fraternity is missing when we access fraternity ties in India, or in order to have fraternity bonding between individuals, they must have shared past has been two amicable ones and cannot be drawn from the ideological differences rooted in the past social inequalities among different communities. Since ideological motivations hamper political fraternity between individuals, one has to have a secular concept of a fraternity and subsequently of its politics. Decidedly, the shared history of India is made by the caste system and it militates against the principle of equality as well as of the idea of liberty. Traditional roots of organizing civic life in India is predominantly communal, but the constitutional privileges the individuals. Ensconced in the liberty, equality, and fraternity troika, leading to every conflict with the community. Therefore, the only conception of the fraternity feasible for India must be rooted in the politics. The only realm where caste privilege can be challenged, the idea needs to be curated and carved and instilled through the political conditioning and not from the standpoint of the any moral consideration. One of the main ideas behind the introduction of a slew of affirmative actions of which the reservation system has survived was to build a certain equality between extremely different social groups in terms of their access to social and economic goods on the formulations of liberty, equality, fraternity coexisting as mutually indispensable indispensable precondition to citizenship right. Besides Ambedkar, of course, we also see John Rawls stressing on the same principle in this theory of justice 1971, wherein his difference principle works towards the maintaining a certain equality. In order to realize political fraternity, the idea was still is to create a level playing field between varying social groups locked in structural hierarchy to begin to understand what it takes to really actualize fraternity. The next way G7 saved G20 by agreeing to declaration the German envoy. G7 countries were able to save the G20 from an early demise by agreeing to the draft declaration. German ambassador Philipp Ackerman said on Tuesday, rejecting statements from several countries, including Ukraine, which suggested that Western countries comprising G7 and European Union had totally compromised their stand on Russia and Ukraine. On the contrary, Mr. Ackerman said the German delegation had left Delhi highly satisfied with the outcomes. He credited skillful Indian negotiations as well as a joint proposal by Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa presented to the rest of the G20 as a fait accompli. Hour of hour before the leaders' summit began for the breakthrough in talks, as the Hindu reported on Saturday. The joint proposal by the four consecutive hosts of G20, all belonging to emerging economies, contained, contained the eight paragraphs that finally made it into the summit declaration word for word without any changes. The paragraph under the heading for the planet, people, peace and prosperity, which was also used in the document, has erased language from the Bali G20 declaration that directly criticized Russia for the water in Ukraine. The G20 is very important forum. It is one of the last fora that has everyone around the table, and a summit without a declaration would have meant death to the G20. Mr. Ackerman told journalists at it, and it would have made very difficult for Brazil to pick it up from next year. He said the ultimatum was delivered by the Indian G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant on September 8 overnight, asking other delegations to take it or leave it, and they and if they had a problem with the wording, the four emerging economies had come up with to have their leader to speak to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The account matches with statement made by Mr. Khan during a number of interviews on Monday. Mr. Khan thanked the Sherpas who helped us clinch the geopolitical paras and arrive at the consensus, naming the surpass of Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa specifically. Eventually, all countries agreed to formulations. The German ambassador said it was Russia and China, not the Western Bloc, that needed to be convinced. Russia was isolated. Mr. Ackerman said, countering comments by Russian Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov, who had claimed a diplomatic win as Russia was not named directly for the conflict in the document. Ukraine would have loved to see Russia condemned more explicitly and for the war in Ukraine to be described as a war against Ukraine, as Germany would have liked that too, but one must see that is feasible. Unlike Bali, where the two countries, Russia and China, were no unhappy, we now have a text that is agreed to by all the countries. Mr. Agreement said on Sunday. Ukraine's foreign ministry had reacted angrily, noting that the New Delhi declaration was nothing to be proud of, indicating that the Ukraine government was disappointed that President Vladimir Zelensky had not been invited to the G20 as he had requested in a letter to the Indian Prime Minister. South Korea joining Quad, says envoy Chang Jae-bok. South Korea is keen on joining the Quad, and the ball is now in the groupings court to decide on the expansion. Chang Jae-bok, the South Korean envoy in India, said on Tuesday. On the bilateral front, he said India and South Korea were negotiating expansion of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement and had so far held 10 rounds of discussion, but there was lots of unresolved issues. He said that after the bilateral meeting between the two leaders on the sidelines of G20 summit, there was some momentum. Ease of doing business on the ease of doing business. The envoy in a press interaction said, "We wish Indians we Indian authorities would work harder to make the business environment more friendly to Korean business, he said. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol raised the issue of more friendly conditions and doing business in India during the bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We hope India will respond positively, he said. Elaborating on negotiations to upgrade CEPA, Mr. Chang said the CEPA was agreed in 2009 and became effective from 2010. Five or 6 years later, both sides realized that it needs to be upgraded from 2016-17. There was a negotiation which were stopped during the pandemic. We have had 10 rounds of upgradation negotiations between Ministry of Commerce of Korea and Ministry of Trade of India. We still have lot of the issues unsolved. Now with the discussion between the leaders, we have some momentum to go on. I hope as the ambassador further negotiations will be coming up and we will be able to sort out understanding his issues, he said on the Delhi Declaration as the G20 summit and the compromise were the language of on Russia. He said as India and China were members of G20, there has to be some compromise. Rajnath says Rajnath lays foundation stone for Neoma airfield near LAC in eastern Ladakh. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh on Tuesday virtually laid the foundation stone for the Neoma airfield in the eastern Ladakh near the line of actual control and has also inaugurated the crucial Nechifu tunnel on the axis to Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. In all, he inaugurated 90 infrastructure projects built by the Border Roads Organization at a cost of over 2,900 crore across 11 states and union territories, which include two revamped airfields in Bagdogra and Barakpur in West Bengal, two helipads, 22 roads and 63 bridges. Of these 90 projects, 36 are Arunachal Pradesh, and 26 in Ladakh, and 11 in Jammu and Kashmir, 5 in Mizoram. These three in Himachal Pradesh, two each in Sikkim, Uttarakhand, and West Bengal, and one each Nagaland, Rajasthan, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. A Defense Ministry statement said the Neoma airfield to be developed at a cost of approximately 200 crore rupees will boost air infrastructure in Ladakh and augment the IAF capability along the northern border. The Defense Minister exuded confidence that the airfield, which will be one of the world's highest, would prove to be a game changer for the armed forces. The statement said once completed in about 2 years, the runway will be able to accommodate all fighter jets of IAF. In July, industrial output rises 5.7% a 5-month high gains. India industrial output grew 5.7% in July, the fastest pace in 5 months, aided by an 8% surge in electricity generation and a slightly healthier manufacturing growth of 4.6%. That overall offset of a 3.3% drop in mining and a second successive month of contraction in production of consumer durables. The National Statistical Office, which had estimated the index of industrial production growth at a 3-month low of 3.7% in June, revised if fractionally upgraded upward to 3.75%. The last time industrial output had grown at a sharper pace than July was in February 2023 with a 5.8% year-on-year uptake in absolute terms. However, July production levels marked a 3-month low, were 1.0 point lower than July. Infrastructure and construction goods continued to record sharp growing, rising 11.4% in July. Consumer durables production remained in contraction mode for 7 times in 8 months, though the extent of shrinkage dropped from 6.9% in July to June to 2.7% in July for the first 4 months of 2023-24. This is the only use-based segment of industry with negative growth, down 2.7% from a yearly, but consumer demand for non-durable appeared to be strengthening with an uptick of 7.4% in their output compared with 1.2% in June. PLI and investment capital goods output, a reflection of a planned investment activity, rose 4.6% YoY in July, recovering from an 8-month low of 2.2% in July. However, in absolute terms, the output level were at a 3-month low and 4.6% below June's production. Nine in manufacturing industries witnessed negative growth, including electronics, which is disappointing given that it is a part of the production-linked incentives schemes. Textile continues to underperform due to the hard hit on exports, noted Madan Sabnabis, chief economist at the Bank of Baroda. The sentence of this industrial growth will depend on consumer goods reviving and can only be ascertained by data for the next 3 months. He said high inflation as well as the duration of a pent-up demand will come in the way of future growth for sure, Mr. Sabnabis said, though July's print will offer some statistical suckers for the Reserve Bank of India. The IIP numbers surpassed ICRA chief economist Aditya Nayar's expectations, who attributed the positive surprise to a better than expected performance by the manufacturing sectors. Thus, reckoned industrial growth will be in the range of 5 to 7% in August, partly because of favorable base effect from the last year when IIP sank 0.7%. So, this is all for today, and we will continue from tomorrow onwards. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.